So yeah, the next step you've got, once we get the physical forcing done, once we've got him well ear pinched and he's driving through there and he's pulling through restraint, then we're going to go back and just, well, all we got to do is substitute the e-collar correction for the ear pinch. So instead of pinching his ear, we're going to use an e-collar correction. But we want to introduce that idea first, or this is a really kind of the poignant idea, is think about that in the position we're in now. What does he know better? We've been forcing him for now a few months, a relatively short period, but how long has he known sit here and heel? Since he's a puppy, right? For a long time, for 5 times, 6 times as much. So he knows sit here and heel, and he also knows associated correction. He's familiar with associated correction with those much more. So that's why we want a collar condition for. He already knows those much better. He understands the forcing well for near the end, but better he understands sit here and heel even better. So we want a collar condition for that first, because he's familiar with the correction and the function of sit here heel. It should be an easy to just, instead of pulling on a lead, make a correction, or instead of swatting him or whatever corrections we're making physically with him, we're going to substitute the collar correction in. That's why I'm confident. That's why, it's easier for me to say it harder in your position where you have a collar condition a dog. That collar condition is a no-brainer, because I know how well this dog's well trained to this point. He understands sit here and heel. He understands the physical correction, the consequence for it. He has an expectation for it. We're just making a tiny substitute. Instead of me pulling on your choke chain, I'm going to make a little zap on your neck, or a strong one, depending on what we need to do. But we want to teach that collar conditioning first, so he's familiar with that feeling of before we substitute it for what's a relatively new learned behavior, that the force fetching. Does that make sense? So we could, he's far enough along, we could just proceed and just say, but why not? I mean, again, the color conditioning should take 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sessions, somewhere in there. Just, and mostly, and remember, so when we color condition, we'll look at the color conditioning here shortly. All I'm looking for is a stable response, that he doesn't freak out, that he's there's a number of unstable responses or bad responses they can have. If they have that, we need to slow down, minimize the correction, either in volume or strength or amount, and reteach it to where he's comfortable with it and understands it, because and then proceed from there. I lost my train of thought. So you want to do that where he's something he's more innately familiar with, and where you're more innately familiar. So once he understands, okay, and part of the conditioning too it's not, I get a collar correction for not sitting. It's a collar correction for not healing. It's a collar correction for not coming here. It's a collar correction for, we want to teach the dog in the conditioning that you're being corrected, or you're getting an e-collar correction the same times and places you would get a lead correction, and it's for your disobedience. It's not for a particular task. Right. So that if we do a good job in that conditioning, we can teach it it's for a disobedience of a known task. Then we're going back to a known task of fetch. You know what fetch means, and you know what the consequence is. It's an ear pinch. Well, instead of an ear pinch, we're going to substitute. Matter of fact, most dogs will find, if we've done a good job teaching the basics and done a good job collar conditioning, they're going to find the collar, and yeah, I think you'll find it's easier for you to physically function as a trainer or handler. It's also much easier on the dog to incorporate it. It's less invasive, including just, we've talked a lot about, just you moving, that, you got to do this and that. Well, he anticipates that, and there's a delay. The timing's off. There's a failure, and so we get whatever failure, we got to reel him back in. We got to reach down. We got to get a hold of his ear, and then we got to apply pressure. Well, that takes 2 or 3 seconds. With an e-collar, got to lead on him. I can apply pressure. I can apply pressure immediately, or I can more precisely time the correction. So your timing comes up dramatically, and the variation. Another important part of why we transfer it to an e-collar. One, it makes it easier for you. 2, it's easier on the dog. A dog's gonna have a more stable response because it's timed better, which makes it a clearer correction for the dog. You're going to get a more stabilized response. Anytime we're pinching, striking, choking, any type of correction like that, they're more apt to be more physically adverse to that than the collar corrections delivered at the right levels for the right times and sensibly done should be more calming effect. I started to say, so the other thing about the conditioning, or where it becomes easier now once we get the force fetch taught physically. Well, right where the place we would just, I would say, well, if the e-collar is so much better, why don't we just start with the e-collar? The problem with the e-collar, if they don't have in teaching something brand new, like when we started this, we never induced pain and made him go forward, you know. So teaching that with the e-collar is infinitely harder and produces the opposite effect, a much more unstable response. Um, it's always better manually. Everything we should teach, everything is best taught manually first, and then go back and overlay and reteach it with a collar correction.